Let's begin. We're going to talk about a new report that's urging Britain to be more patriotic. It's called Redefining Britain First, and Annan wrote the foreword. But is more patriotism what we need right now? And can you be patriotic without veering into reform-style nationalism? Matt, given how bad some things are in Britain at the moment, is it even useful to talk about patriotism? What exactly should we be proud of?
I think it's an interesting one. I think we can't deny the fact that human beings, we are naturally tribal, and most people have some feeling towards their country, some feeling towards where they're from and where they are. And there is that sense of, sort of shared belonging, which is a phrase that keeps coming back in this report, which I think is what patriotism is when it's at its best in many ways. There's a word cloud on one of the pages of this report, which I thought was very interesting because it says, what do you think of Britain's place in the world? And there are lots of negative words, but the main word is good. And that's the biggest word. And yes, there are lots of negative words around it. But I think it does still show that even when things are, as you say, pretty bad, we do have a great history, have a great culture. There's lots to be proud of. There are lots of people in this country who are doing great things. And in times of stress, COVID is a good example, people do pull together and there's a sense of community spirit or, patriotic spirit. It feels to me that the more we talk about things being bad and people not wanting to pull together, we're in that place where, there's a danger of being a bit like Starmer straight after the election, where he came out and made that ridiculous speech saying things are going to get worse before they get better. And all that does is just make people go, oh, really? Oh, God. And I think if you tell people that the country's in a terrible state and that nobody enjoys being British anymore, then that's just going to make things worse.
Because when you talk about patriotism, there is a risk of sinking into nostalgia, isn't there? I mean, there's a kind of instinct to look to the glories of the past when things aren't going great. But of course, that has its own pitfalls, and people, especially on the left, are suspicious of it.
And I think that's a danger that the left has of constantly looking at the bad things. That of course, there were terrible things that happened in the past in the British Empire and places and things like that. But look back in any country, there are things that you can say that are bad. And there is this danger, of course, if you look back in a sort of exclusionary way, that you say, well, things were better back then and we need to go back to something. It's obviously like make America great again. It's that sort of nostalgic trip that people are looking for. There's a stat in the report that really struck me, which was that 72% of Britons said reviving British manufacturing and industry would make them feel prouder to be British, which essentially is, I want to go back in time. That's all that is. And that's not realistic or likely or even desirable in a modern economy. But people, they talk about this in the report saying they just want a return to a time when Britain felt stronger, more self-sufficient and stable. And psychologically, this can be understood as a form of loss aversion and nostalgia. So it's people, when people are feeling bad, when people are feeling under threat, what they want to do is go back to the time before. But actually, is that a realistic option? Probably not.
Yeah, it's interesting how they always, that vision of Britain in the past and manufacturing jobs and things. And it's almost a reaction against the fact that what we really need right now are people doing a lot more caring jobs.
Yeah.
But
and
that is unpopular.
I mean, people worked in the factories and down the mines and all that kind of stuff. Do people really want to go back to that? Or is it just they want to go back to a time when people had jobs that they felt they could rely on?
This report is trying to reclaim the term Britain First, which is, of course, the name of a far-right party, well to the right of reform. They're holding a remigration march next month. It's unpleasant stuff. Is it really possible to reclaim a term like this? I mean, especially with the Trumpian America First connotations as well.
I actually think that the Trump connotations are far more problematic than the kind of lunatic fringe party associations here, because globally, America First now has a huge impact on the whole world. And so being seen to ape it in any way, even if we're trying to create something much more positive behind the terms, it's very hard to control that narrative elsewhere. You can't force somebody to digest your message if you're using exactly the same language as another much larger force in global politics. And for me, I think reclaiming it is a task that's it's a stretch too far. You can't redefine that language as kind of proud and pure, because there's no way to say Britain First without conjuring up the politics of populism. Because with first, you're dealing in absolutes. First comes with last, us before them. And I think it creates an othering, which is why, obviously, for those parties on the right, it works so well alongside anti-immigration rhetoric, around anti-diversity rhetoric. But if you're trying to create a more modern, a more progressive case for a strong Britain, it just doesn't work to deliver that for me.
It reminds me of people in government using words like Doge, say we need our own version of
Yes,
the Department of
exactly.
Government Efficiency. It's like, yeah, great, but as soon as you say that word, you're just making us think of Musk and Trump and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the awful behaviour that comes with it, rather than the kind of aim of greater efficiency. I think you're absolutely right. I think the Labour Party and the centre left can't meaningfully go anywhere near this without playing very dangerous games. That's my kind of my kind of immediate hunch is of real negativity towards it, I'm afraid.
For their part, the authors of the report say that Britain First might not mean insularity. It may, as they put it, represent a belief that the country has looked outwards for too long while neglecting problems at home. I mean, we hear about this kind of thing when Keir Starmer is criticised for spending too much time abroad. Is this, though, the reaction of a country that's finally realising it doesn't have the clout it once did and thinking, oh, right, let's just do our own thing then?
Let's give it up. Well, so I think it's possible for two things to be true at once. It's definitely possible to admit that things are worse on the home front than has been the case for a long time and has been acknowledged for a long time. But along with that comes a sort of responsibility for acknowledging that those problems were created at home as well. So it is the failings of the last Conservative government that got us to the position that we are in now. Also, in the report, there are some interesting statistics that I feel don't fit together easily. So 63% of Britons support a Britain First approach, and 49% say they would feel prouder if Britain led the way on climate change agreements, and more than a third would feel proud about increasing international development and aid spending. Well, which is it? Yeah. If it's Britain First, then it's not aid and development first. It's not about having that global perspective in everything that you do. So I see the aim here, but I remain sceptical about the potential for actually creating change.
Yeah, unless, of course, you're taking a sort of Britain first, and I will engage with the world, but it's always Britain first kind of approach, I suppose.
Well, that's kind of America first, isn't it? It's saying, we will do whatever we like around the world and you can't stop us.
Anand, in the foreword, you say patriotism is often looked down on by those with a global and cosmopolitan outlook. Why do many of us shy away from it? What is the bit of the origin story of patriotism that puts us off?
I think there are several things. I think, firstly, people on the left are sometimes just guilty of excessive miserableism. That sort of social democracy is rooted in, oh my God, we're failing, we need to do things, rather than saying, actually acknowledging the strengths we have and saying we will build on them. So partly this is just about tone. This is about actually you can be proud of where you're from. You can say you're proud of where you're from. That's not to say you don't think that there are problems with where you're from, but it's partly about that changing tone. But it's also, I think, the fact that, and, Keir Starmer got this very early on with all the photos of him with Union Jacks and the like, and, of course, with the national anthem being sung at Labour Party conference that year, which is you can be left-wing and proud of your country. And actually, not only is it probably a good electoral strategy to be obviously proud of your country, but it also makes sense. I mean, on one level, Britain First is an absolute truism, isn't it? Because you wouldn't expect the British social security system to be generous to the unemployed in France, right? You wouldn't expect our government to say, oh, we need to worry about those Turkish citizens because, they're in trouble. So in a sense, we have a community, and the question here is about the balance you strike. So on the international aid question, for instance, I think you can perfectly well say, yes, I believe in doing things that are good for Britain, and I believe in international aid, because that's just simply accepting the fact that we're an island that is massively impacted by what goes on in the outside world, and ultimately a more stable, less conflict-ridden world is not just good for the world, it's good for us as well. So, and this is all these things as ever lie on a spectrum. And I think this is just an attempt, this report, to try and figure out where in that spectrum the centre-left can place itself to be part of this debate. And I think it does make sense for the left to be part of this debate, because not being part of the debate leaves the field totally open to a load of unpleasant people to occupy it.
I mean, I do agree that patriotism and nationalism are absolutely not the same thing. That it is very possible to be on the left or centre left and being extremely proud of being British and to seek a British state that leads in the world, answers questions at home and abroad. I think they're not incompatible at all. I think for me it's the first language, because when we're talking about that work that you described on international aid, those on the left and I would hope the centre-left also believe in doing that work because it is the right thing to do in the world, not simply just because it does have those very important, crucial knock-on benefits in terms of security and immigration and all of those expensive problems.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think it's also the case, we haven't mentioned it yet, that we're in a specific situation in this country which is shared by much of the Western world, where we've not had growth for a decade and a half, where median wages haven't gone up since 2008. And it's far harder for people to be generous, to be open-hearted, to be sort of less mean-spirited at a time when they're struggling to make ends meet, where you've got rampant problems of child poverty and so on and so forth. So I think a lot of these things are interlinked, and I absolutely buy your point that there was a time when we did these things just because we thought it was the right thing to do, but they were easier times.
What makes you feel patriotic about Britain, Anand? What's your...
Actually, the one thing that makes me most patriotic about being Britain is being abroad. So talking to my Indian relatives about Britain, I become wildly patriotic about the United Kingdom. And the same when, if I'm sort of working in France or whatever. I mean, being confronted with other people criticising this country is like a red rag to a bull. So that's the easy answer. I think if you look at this country, it's a small offshore island that is the sixth biggest economy in the world, that has made an outsized influence, some good, some bad, to world history, that has been a cultural hub way, way beyond what you'd expect of an island of ours. So there are so many things that we do really well and we've done really well. Now, you've got to be quite sort of agile mentally to put that together with, however, we're in a world that is changing, where our influence is declining, where others are rising. I mean, I play both sides of this, because quite often in my family WhatsApp group, you'll have sort of laughing conversations. So I've got an Indian family. My family WhatsApp group, before you think it's 5, is 250 people, right? The vast majority of whom are based in India. Just wait till the Brits realise that actually the Indian economy is far bigger than that. There's a lot of that goes on. I mean, it is difficult to adjust to a world in which your influence is waning. But I think you can do that while still recognising the fact that your country has made and continues to make a significant contribution.
Nuance is possible, in other words.
Yeah, though difficult.
Difficult, yeah. Matt, what about you? What brings a proud lump to your throat?
I mean, obviously, I'd agree with Anand. The arts, culture, literature, not just costume dramas. There's everything. We punch massively above our weight in terms of TV, film, theatre. Also, obvious thing for me to say, but sense of humour. Famously, there's a lot of good comedy and a sense of humour generally about public life. I think we are at risk of losing that a bit. I think we are in a dangerous place when you've got people being arrested, as apparently they were this weekend, for holding up a private eye joke at a protest. I think we're getting into dangerous territory there. And also sport. We've given the world lots of sports, and they've happily taken them and then got better than us at them. And I think I just love, in a sort of existential way, I love the fact that Britain is 4 countries and that we can sort of travel between them. And we are part of a community, that we can go to Scotland, go to the Edinburgh Festival, which is one of the most incredible things that exists in the world.
Are you there this year?
I am. Tickets are still available.
I thought you might be.
But every time I'm at the Fringe or the festival generally, there's a real sense of energy and excitement, and people from all over the world are coming to Edinburgh because it's the place to be in August for those sorts of people. And you literally don't get that in other parts of the world. So I think, there are lots of things to be very proud of. Those are the things that make me excited.
Surely you've got to say something nice about Wales and Northern Ireland now.
Yeah, I'm not going on tour there, so that's a shame. That's a shame.
Wales is lost, yeah. I was interviewing someone today who works in children's TV, and she was saying, I feel really proud of children's TV in Britain.
Yeah.
It's great. I hadn't really thought about that,
it's
but
amazing.
actually, yeah.
Yeah, and it's being massively, funding's been cut all the time because it's not seen as important.
But for me, it's probably the cricket and train announcements. I get very emotional when I hear train announcements. I can't really explain. It's just something about the list of stations. Anyway, Hannah.
Well, as we've said all the serious things that I was going to mention, I'll take it down a silly angle. London pub gardens in the summer, and egg sandwiches and a pot of tea in a National Trust property, which is daft but genuinely true. There's nothing that makes me feel more British and at home and happier than that. But actually, Anand made me think of something then when he was talking about being abroad. There is that lurch of lurch of pride in the soul that happens when you're coming into land after a holiday and you see the kind of, patchwork of Britain, the green fields and so on. I grew up in this countryside, so it does make me feel sort of happy to be home when I see that. And it's true that, I think there's something really positive about that sense of identity, kind of who you are and where you came from and the things that shaped you. And I don't think there's anything negative about that at all. I think there are positive ways to build on this. And, in the 90s, that genuinely happened. We talk about things like the YBAs and so on, talking about art. That was a real moment. And pop music.
Cool Britannia.
Yeah. And there's no reason that can't happen again. And I do agree with you that it's this kind of sense of sluggishness and misery that's preventing it.
Do you think sometimes it's because people, to massively generalise on the sort of centre left, often are people who have moved away from where they lived as children, that they kind of moved to the big city, they've kind of taken on a job or taken on a career which was something that maybe people around them would have been a bit suspicious of or not quite sure about. I mean, certainly lots of my friends, we all moved to London because that was where the media was, that was where the arts were in lots of ways. And therefore we have that slight less connection to the places we came from. And there's and that we can slip into that kind of slightly cynical, slightly sort of patronising view of like, well, I don't want to go back there. I want to be in this sort of world city.
This is what Theresa May was trying to get at with Citizens of Nowhere.
Sure.
But I think there's something broadly about being British that doesn't require you to have kind of, severed your ties entirely. There is something about those formative cultural touch points, all of which we've mentioned today, which I think don't leave you. And it does leave a lot of scope for politicians to create a positive message rather than the negative ones that we're hearing.
And it's messy. I mean, for me, I'm still reeling from the fact that Ross finds See It, Say It sorted emotionally sort of affecting. But, I'm a Yorkshireman.
It's just poetry.
Yeah,
it's poetry.
Absolutely, yes. I'm a Yorkshireman. I'm Indian. I'm British. I have multiple sort of conflicting, competing, noisy sort of identities. And it's not simple. And I think I haven't come to terms with them all yet. So, these things are meant to be difficult. They're not necessarily very, very easy. So that clash between where you grew up and where you end up living is a real one. I mean, I feel that.
Yeah, I don't feel for me it's different though. It's not looking back and thinking that place, I'm glad I got away. It's that actually, now I look back on it, especially the further I get away from it, I feel slightly guilty towards it that I've abandoned it, and also very respectful towards it.
Yeah.
And always conscious of the fact that, it's a very, very different type of community from the one I live in now. And in many ways, it's better than the one I live in now. So, yeah.
Would you have said that, 20 years ago?
Before I left, no, I hated it.
That's what I mean. I think there's a period. I think particularly people in their 20s, 30s, whatever. They're pushing away from that a lot of the time, and then you come back to it as you get a little bit older, maybe. Yeah.
Hannah, is it partly kind of defiance almost that puts legacy Remainer types off these national displays of patriotism? Are we just uncomfortable with all that royal adjacent pomp, or with what we see as an oversimplification of history?
I think it can. Those kind of expressions can be an oversimplification, but I don't think that there's. Again, I don't think there's any need for it to be. The two things don't need to be mutually exclusive. You can be a royalist and still have thoughts about, the years of empire and so on. They're not incompatible views. I don't think there's anything wrong with that royal pomp. It's not really for me. I'm not the sort of person who goes and stands and waves, a flag and waits for a procession to go past. But, the Royals are one of our biggest exports. I have no problem really with that. And I think sometimes there's a little bit too much focus on people who have extremely strong views on the left around anti-royalism, kind of anti-nationalism, that doesn't represent the majority of people on the left. And so I think that's where I think this report is right, in that it starts a conversation that probably more people are open to than we might immediately think from the coverage that you see in the media.
And I mean, for the authors of the report, the fact that we're having this conversation now is kind of mission accomplished. You know.
Matt, the organisation More in Common contributed to this report, and they divide Britons into 8 categories. Things like backbone conservatives, progressive activists, disengaged battlers. You know, that last one always makes me think of a very listless Civil War reenactment. I always hate this labelling because I never feel I fit into any of them. Do these labels fit us anymore?
Well, I'm just kind of confused and baffled because last week in this very studio, I was talking about how there were new tribes. They had come up with 7 new tribes, segments. And I was sort of reading this report feeling quite disorientated, thinking, where are the sceptical scrollers? Where are the dissenting disruptors? Which again sound like medieval rebels or something. And I think it just feels like More in Common every couple of years they go, right, let's throw all the pieces down and let's change it around a little bit and come up with some new names and, you know, get a few press releases and things. And yeah, there is a bit of a sense to me of, I think as we talked about last week a little bit, that there's a slight irony in an organisation called More in Common spending quite a lot of time determining exactly how we are not all the same and how we're all sort of separated into these little areas, these little segments. And I think what this report probably shows more than anything, I was thinking about those numbers that Hannah was talking about, is that there's quite a lot of overlap. You don't know who those people are, and they attempt to delineate it through these segments, but it's not very clear. That are the people who are pro foreign aid the people who are also pro not giving foreign? You know, like where are these gaps in the data? And it does make me wonder how useful it is to divide people up and then ask them all those questions again. Where is it more useful to do that through the segments, or is it more useful to give a sort of an overall view?
I must say, I feel morally obliged for the sake of my friends at More in Common, just to let listeners know that there is a quiz you can do that will let you know which of these segments you fit into yourself.
We're all the same, unfortunately, we turned out. Yeah.
Yes, I did it. I was very unhappy with the result. Did not feel it defined me. Anne, and one thing does tend to unite a country, and that is war. Football, to a lesser extent, but ultimately war. Do we only really know how to define ourselves as Britons when we're fighting against something, someone?
No, actually. I mean, one of the paradoxes about both football and war is they're some of the most multinational undertakings there are now. You know, if you look at the Premier League and the teams you support, or if you look at how modern armies fight alongside units from other armies, they're not national anymore. It's one of the weird paradoxes of the world we live in. But no, I think, you know, you can see this country coming together in different ways. You saw it with the Queen's funeral, with the coronation, for instance. You see it at big sporting events. You see it with England women's football team at the moment. So I don't think it's necessarily the case. I think there is a sense of civic nationalism here still, even though there are people around who want to try and exploit it and turn it into something far more insidious. So no, I don't think that's the case. Obviously, war does have that impact, but I don't think it's right to say that only war has that impact.
I sometimes feel that Brexit was almost like a proxy war without, the need for bloodshed.
But civil wars are very different, aren't they?
Yes.
I was going to say, yeah, civil war is not a.
Yeah, they don't tend to bind you together quite as much.
No. Lastly, there have been ugly demos in Essex and Diss outside hotels housing asylum seekers. We all know what happened last August, and the government is clearly worried about this escalating. Does this report tell us anything about how to tackle these anti-migrant protests?
I mean, I think if it did, it would get a lot more publicity than it has. What I would say is it gives us some roots into thinking about how we place ourselves in relation to the outside world, and nothing much more than that. I mean, to be fair to the authors of the report, the target wasn't necessarily things such as these demonstrations that we're seeing, which, we can have a whole podcast episode about, but I don't think it was necessarily aimed at dealing with the specific situation we see in places like Essex at the moment. I think it was more about a sort of more meta question, which is how we place ourselves in relation to the world outside. And that's part of this. I mean, one of the things we struggle with, I think I think in general, the UK has a very liberal, tolerant, relatively successful multiracial society compared to certainly any other European society I can think about. That being said, we, like many other countries in Western Europe, are struggling with our self-image as an open, tolerant, welcoming, liberal country, and a world in which there is loads of unrest, there is loads of war, and millions upon millions of people are seeking new homes. And I think the report simply doesn't provide answers to that, but it is a debate we will need to have on the left as well as on the right.
After the riots last year, you wrote that you'd thought racism was disappearing from Britain, and now you had to rethink. How are you feeling about it now?
I find it very hard to get a sense of perspective, firstly, because it's very hard sometimes it's quite hard to remind yourself that the fact that there is a certain reaction to something on Twitter is not representative of the country as a whole. I feel we're at a dangerous moment. I still think, God, we have come so far since my childhood in the 1970s, and we don't say it enough. We've come miles and miles and miles. This is a completely different society now, and the sorts of stuff that was commonplace back then just doesn't happen now, and it's worth saying that to start with. However, I think I can't shake the feeling we're at a bit of an inflection point at the moment where public debate is becoming poisonous again, where racist tropes are becoming acceptable in a way that they haven't been for quite a significant amount of time. The people out there, the sort of right-wing agitators who mix up terms like British, British-born, white British for their own ends are becoming more and more widespread. So I do worry about the tone of the debate at the moment, and I worry about how some people who I might have once regarded as centre-right are themselves using some of these terminology in a very, very loose and dangerous way.
Yeah, there's been that particularly unpleasant turn towards scrutinising people's ancestry.
Yeah.